In the middle of a busy city park, with the sun casting long shadows across the paths, a little boy sat on a worn wooden bench. His clothes were old and patched in a few places, but they had been cared for the best he could. A small violin rested on his shoulder, held carefully even though it had scratches and tiny cracks from years of use. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes were quiet, almost hesitant, like he was speaking softly to the world, asking if anyone cared to listen. The city around him seemed too busy to notice. People hurried past, talking on their phones, carrying bags or rushing to appointments. Some glanced at him, some ignored him entirely. It didn't matter to the boy. Music was his way of speaking when the world didn't stop to listen. He was small for his age, with hair that fell in messy strands over his forehead and fingers that were thin but nimble. Every time he drew the bow across the strings, it seemed as though he poured a piece of himself into the music. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of feeling. There was a certain honesty in the way he played that could not be taught. On a path nearby, a black limousine rolled to a stop. Out stepped a tall, sharply dressed man, his presence commanding attention. He wasn't just anyone walking through the park. He was a billionaire known for his wealth, his extravagant parties, and his sharp tongue. People who saw him usually felt nervous, unsure whether to approach or keep a respectful distance. But today, curiosity had drawn him toward the faint sound of music that carried across the park. The billionaire paused at the edge of the path, his eyes narrowing slightly as he observed the boy. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk forming on his face. The little boy was so focused on his violin that he didn't notice the man at first. The billionaire walked closer, stepping carefully on the grass so as not to disturb the music. When he finally spoke, his voice was a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Play something good and maybe I'll adopt you," he said, with a hint of mockery. The boy didn't respond right away. His bow continued to glide across the strings, each note floating in the air like a small whisper of hope. The words didn't seem to faze him. He had heard laughter before, seen people scoff at his worn clothes or the way he carried himself, but he had learned to keep going. The music was stronger than any insult. The billionaire chuckled, clearly expecting a clumsy attempt at a tune that would confirm his assumptions about the boy. But as the melody grew, it became clear that this was no ordinary child playing in the park. The notes were full of emotion, bending and rising in ways that made it hard to believe someone so young could create such depth. People passing by began to slow down. Some stopped completely, leaning against railings or sitting on benches nearby to listen. The city's usual noise seemed to fade into the background as the boy played. A woman with a stroller whispered to her child to be quiet. A man walking his dog stood still, watching the boy's hands move with a strange combination of delicacy and strength. Even the billionaire's aide, who had followed silently behind, seemed captivated, unable to look away. The boy's eyes were closed and his face wore a soft expression, almost as if he were talking to someone invisible. Every note told a story of struggle, of quiet determination, of a heart that refused to give up even when the world ignored him. There was a sadness there, yes, but also a courage that seemed far beyond his years. The billionaire leaned forward slightly, his smirk fading as he listened more closely. He had been in rooms with world-class musicians, had attended concerts in the most prestigious halls, and yet something about this little boy's music stirred something he hadn't expected. He felt an unfamiliar emotion, a mixture of awe and guilt. Perhaps he had underestimated what could come from someone so small, so seemingly insignificant. People in the park started murmuring among themselves. "Who is he?" one woman asked softly. "He's amazing," whispered a young man. The sound of applause was barely audible at first, but then a few people clapped, then more, until a small group gathered around the boy. They didn't care about his clothes or his age. All they cared about was the music, the raw talent, the emotion pouring from his tiny violin. The boy finally opened his eyes. He looked around briefly, noticing the crowd that had formed. For a moment, his lips curved into a small, shy smile, but he didn't stop playing. The music flowed through him like a river that couldn't be contained. Each note seemed to speak of nights spent alone, practicing in the dim light of a small apartment, of days when he had nothing but his violin to hold on to. The billionaire remained silent, his hands clasped behind his back. There was no mocking tone now, no challenge, He watched as the boy's fingers moved with precision, coaxing melodies that seemed to make the air itself tremble. The sharp lines of his suit and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to the boy's worn clothing. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Music had leveled the playing field in a way nothing else could. The boy played on, lost in the music, lost in a world that was finally listening. Some people wiped tears from their eyes, touched by the honesty of the sound. Others simply stared, unable to speak, as if the melody had put them in a trance. The billionaire shifted slightly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest, a sense of humility he wasn't used to. He had wealth, power, influence, but here, in this park, in front of a small boy with a battered violin, he felt powerless. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the boy's piece came to an end. The last note lingered in the air, vibrating softly like a whisper. For a moment there was silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, one by one, people started to clap. First a few hesitant hands, then more, until the sound of applause grew loud enough to echo across the park. The boy lowered his violin, breathing a little harder than before, but with a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had played not for attention, not for praise, but because music was who he was. The billionaire stepped forward, no longer with arrogance, no longer with mockery. He looked at the boy, truly looked, and for the first time saw him as more than just a poor child in a park. He saw the dedication, the talent, the courage, the heart that had carried him this far. The boy's gaze met his for a brief moment, calm and steady. There was no fear, no pleading, no expectation. He had given everything he had in that music, and now, whether the man believed it or not, he had nothing more to prove. The billionaire finally spoke, this time with a tone of genuine curiosity. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy shrugged, a little smile on his face. "I just practice," he said simply. "Every day." The billionaire nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He realized something important in that moment. Talent like this wasn't something money could buy. It wasn't something that could be forced or faked. It was born from heart, from determination, from a love for something so pure that nothing else could overshadow it. As the crowd began to disperse, still murmuring about the incredible performance they had witnessed, the boy packed up his violin and started to walk down the path toward home. The billionaire watched him go, a strange mix of admiration and regret settling in his chest. He had mocked the boy, expected nothing, and yet the boy had left him speechless. For the little boy, the encounter was just another day. But for those who had stopped to listen, especially the billionaire, it was a reminder that greatness could appear anywhere, in anyone, even in the most unexpected places. And sometimes all it took was a moment of attention to see it. The boy walked slowly down the park path, his violin case tucked carefully under his arm. The afternoon sun cast warm golden light over the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves above. Even though the crowd had mostly dispersed, a few people lingered, their eyes still fixed on him as he passed. Some whispered to each other, amazed at the music they had just heard, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. He didn't look back. The music had always been his companion, his comfort, and his way of saying what words could not. He had learned long ago that not everyone would understand him, and that was okay. As long as he could play, he was never truly alone. The billionaire followed at a careful distance, his sharp suit and polished shoes standing out against the casual attire of the parkgoers. He felt a strange pull to keep watching the boy. It wasn't curiosity alone. There was something deeper, something that tugged at the part of him he usually kept hidden. He had seen a lot in his life, had met countless people, had power and money enough to bend the world to his will. But this boy, with his small violin and unassuming manner, had done something no one else had. He had made the billionaire stop. He had made him feel. As the boy turned a corner and approached a narrow street lined with old apartment buildings, the billionaire slowed his pace. He didn't want to scare the boy, didn't want to seem like one of those people who only watched to mock or judge. He just wanted to see him, to understand where such music came from. The boy stopped briefly at a corner bench, resting for a moment. He took the violin out again, lifted it carefully, and ran his fingers over the strings. Without thinking, he began to play another melody. This one was softer, quieter, almost like a secret shared only with the wind. The notes floated gently through the air, catching on the edges of the buildings, spilling into the street and drawing the attention of anyone passing by. The billionaire's eyebrows lifted. He hadn't expected the boy to play again, not so soon, not without an audience demanding it. Yet here he was, letting the music come freely, as though it belonged to the world but to no one in particular. People began to gather again, drawn by the magic of sound. A shopkeeper leaned out of his doorway, the smell of bread and pastries mingling with the melody. A delivery man paused, his hands full, captivated by the unexpected beauty. The boy's music told stories without words. It spoke of mornings spent waiting for someone to notice, of nights lit only by a single lamp and the hope that tomorrow would bring something better. Each note rose and fell like the heartbeats of someone who had felt loneliness but refused to let it break them. Even the billionaire who had seen the best performers in the world felt a lump form in his throat. He had never heard anything like this before, not in any concert hall, not in any music school. As the crowd grew, murmurs of admiration spread. "He's incredible," a young woman said, clutching her phone as she recorded the moment. "Where did he learn to play like that?" asked an elderly man, his voice quiet but full of awe. "It's like he's telling a story," whispered a boy about the same age as the performer, his eyes wide with wonder. The little boy played on, seemingly unaware of the gathering crowd. He was lost in the music, his focus absolute. He did not play to impress, nor did he seek applause. He played because he had to. Each note was a piece of his soul, a fragment of a life that had been both difficult and beautiful in its own quiet way. The billionaire shifted his weight, leaning slightly on a nearby railing. He couldn't take his eyes off the boy. For the first time he felt the urge to approach, to speak, but something held him back. It was not shyness or fear, it was respect. He did not want to interrupt, did not want to break the spell. He simply watched, absorbing each sound, each movement, each expression of the boy's face. A few children from the neighborhood crept closer, curiosity overcoming caution. They stood at the edges of the crowd, hesitant but captivated. One of them whispered, "Do you hear that? It's like he's playing what's inside his heart." The other nodded, eyes wide, unable to speak further. Even the adults found themselves silent, listening, feeling, remembering something they had long forgotten. The power of a voice that speaks without words. The boy's fingers moved with grace and precision, though there was no arrogance in his movements. He was not performing. He was expressing. The violin sang under his touch, its cracks and scratches almost invisible beneath the richness of the sound. People started to close their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. The businessman standing nearby, used to commanding attention in every room he entered, felt powerless. He realized that here, in this street filled with ordinary people and extraordinary music, his wealth and status meant nothing. Suddenly, the boy shifted the tune. The melody changed, slow and soft, tinged with sadness. It was a tune of longing, of dreams just out of reach. Some in the crowd held their breath, feeling the emotion in a way that went beyond words. A few wiped tears from their eyes, ashamed to be caught so moved. The billionaire's chest felt tight, his mind unusually quiet. He had never been moved like this in a long time. Perhaps never. As the piece reached its peak, the boy's bow danced across the strings with increasing speed and intensity. The sound was no longer quiet. It was commanding attention, demanding to be heard. People began to clap and cheer, breaking into spontaneous applause. But the boy did not stop immediately. He played through it, as if the noise of the world could not touch the music inside him. Only when the last note lingered and faded into the afternoon air did he finally lower his violin, breathing steadily but with a glow of quiet pride. The billionaire stepped closer this time, no hesitation in his movement. He finally spoke, not in jest or sarcasm, but in genuine awe. You're amazing," he said softly, almost as if the words were too small for what he felt. The boy looked up at him, calm and measured, as though he had expected this reaction but did not need it. "Thank you," he replied simply. His voice was small but steady. It matched the honesty in his music. "Where did you learn to play like that?" the billionaire asked, curiosity now overtaking all else. "I just practice," the boy said quietly. "Every day." The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in thought. That was all? No fancy school? No expensive lessons? Just hours and hours of practice. There was something about that answer that humbled him. He had everything money could buy, yet it had never taught him patience like this. or how to make something so beautiful with just one instrument and one heart. People around them continued to murmur, some recording videos, some exchanging looks of disbelief. But the boy's attention had already shifted slightly, as if sensing that the world was moving on. But the music inside him was far from finished. He carefully packed his violin into its case and slung it over his shoulder. The billionaire followed silently, not wanting to crowd him, but unwilling to let the moment end. There was something about this boy, something rare and pure that demanded attention and respect. It was not just talent, it was heart. It was a story told without words, a message that spoke louder than any promise or insult could. As they walked down the quiet streets, the billionaire found himself thinking about the boy in ways he had never thought about another human being. He had met geniuses, leaders, celebrities, and innovators, yet none had moved him like this child with a violin. There was honesty here, courage, and a will to keep going even when the world ignored him. That was something money could never buy and power could never force. The boy, unaware of the depth of the billionaire's thoughts, walked with steady steps, humming quietly to himself. The music had always been his world, a place where he could be fully himself. And today, for the first time, someone with wealth and influence had truly noticed, not mocked, not patronized, but noticed. It was a small moment, yet it carried weight far beyond the park or the street. For the boy, it was another day of living and playing and being. For the billionaire, it was a moment of awakening, a reminder that greatness could exist anywhere, in anyone, and that sometimes the world needed only a single note to stop and listen. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. The boy continued on his path home, the violin tucked carefully under his arm, the melody of the afternoon still alive in the hearts of those who had listened. The billionaire stayed back for a moment, letting the sounds fade, but knowing that this encounter, however brief, had left an imprint that would not be forgotten. And so, the boy walked on, unaware of the full impact of his music, and the billionaire remained quietly humbled, realizing that talent, heart, and determination could speak louder than all the wealth and power in the world. The next day, the boy returned to the same park, carrying his violin case like an old friend. The streets were quieter in the morning, with the city slowly waking up. Shopkeepers swept the sidewalks, joggers passed by with earbuds in, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. He chose his usual bench, the one under the large oak tree with branches that swayed gently in the breeze. It had become his spot, a place where the world could pass by without rushing him. He opened his case, carefully placing the violin on his shoulder. He drew the bow across the strings and a soft, clear note rang out, mingling with the chirping birds. The sound was delicate at first, almost like a whisper, but gradually it grew, filling the empty spaces of the park with music. Every note seemed to carry a story, though no one could name it. The boy closed his eyes, feeling the melody as it passed through him. He didn't notice anyone yet. He played because it was the only way he could speak to the world. It wasn't long before the crowd started to gather. Word had spread after yesterday's performance. A few people had shared videos, and by mid-morning, a small group of curious listeners appeared. They lingered quietly at first, unsure if they should disturb the boy. Some had phones out recording the music, while others simply stopped and let the sound fill their hearts. The billionaire arrived again, this time without the entourage. He walked slowly, blending in with the crowd, though the sharpness of his suit and polished shoes still made him stand out. He had thought about the boy all night, unable to shake the image of him playing with such intensity and honesty. It had been a long time since anything had moved him in such a simple human way. The money, the power, the endless meetings, none of it mattered here. As he approached, he noticed how completely absorbed the boy was in his music. The fingers moved effortlessly, the bow gliding across the strings, and the sound seemed to grow richer with every passing moment. The melody was no longer just notes, it was a story, full of emotion, full of life. The billionaire felt himself drawn in, his chest tightening as the music spoke to him in a language he hadn't known he remembered. Other people were stopping now, and the crowd grew larger by the minute. A man leaning on a lamppost said quietly to the person next to him, "I can't believe a kid this age can play like that. It's like he's telling a story with his violin." The woman beside him nodded, eyes glistening with tears she didn't try to hide. Children crouched near the grass, staring in wonder at the tiny figure holding the violin like a giant. The boy played on, lost in the sound, unaware of the growing audience. Each note carried emotion, Joy, sadness, hope, and longing, all wrapped together in a melody that seemed older than the boy himself. Some in the crowd had heard skilled musicians before, but this was different. There was no pretension, no showmanship, only pure, heartfelt music. The air seemed to vibrate with it, moving through the trees, the benches, the people, filling even the empty spaces with something unexplainable. The billionaire felt a mix of admiration and something he hadn't expected: humility. He realized that he had never truly listened to music like this before, not in the way it could connect to a person's soul. He had attended grand concerts, met celebrated artists, and spent fortunes on experiences that were meant to impress, but nothing had ever made him pause and feel so small and so alive at the same time. For the boy, the music was freedom. It was a place where the world's judgment didn't exist, where money, status, and appearances meant nothing. Here he could be himself, and it was enough. The notes were his words, the melodies his sentences, and the rhythm his heartbeat. Every time he played, he felt a connection with something larger than himself, as if the world were listening just long enough to understand. A few people whispered to each other, pointing out the billionaire standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Some recognized him, others didn't, but it didn't matter. The music commanded attention far more than any person could. The boy, focused entirely on his violin, seemed to sense only the presence of the world through sound, not through sight. He shifted slightly, changing the tune. The new melody was lively, filled with energy and hope. It made people smile, tap their feet, sway slightly. Children laughed softly, moving closer, inspired by the joy in the notes. Adults couldn't help but smile too, some nodding along in quiet appreciation. The music seemed to lift everyone's spirits, even for just a few minutes, away from the worries and pressures of daily life. The billionaire found himself stepping a little closer. He wanted to understand how a child so small could create such a powerful impact. He realized it wasn't just the notes. It was the boy's heart, his intention, the way he poured himself into the music without asking for anything in return. It was honesty, raw and pure, something money and privilege could never buy. As the melody grew, the boy's bow moved faster, more confidently. The sound rose and fell, carrying the listeners through an emotional journey. Some had tears in their eyes. Others held their breath, captivated by the intensity. The billionaire's thoughts wandered to his own life. The decisions, the deals, the endless pursuit of more. None of it seemed important anymore. Here, on a quiet street in the city park, a small boy with a battered violin had reminded him what truly mattered: heart, dedication, and the courage to express oneself honestly. The crowd began to clap spontaneously, encouraging the boy without interrupting him. A few people recorded videos, their voices hushed in awe. Even strangers who had never met each other smiled, connected briefly by the music that had found its way into their hearts. The boy's eyes were closed again, completely absorbed, yet his slight smile suggested he felt the energy around him. He was aware of the crowd, but it didn't control him. The music did. As the final notes faded, the boy slowly lowered his violin. The crowd erupted into applause, some cheering, others whistling. He breathed steadily, his small chest rising and falling, feeling a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't about the attention or the praise. It was about the music itself and how it made him feel alive. The billionaire stepped forward this time, clearing his throat to get the boy's attention. "You have something rare," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've never heard anyone play like that before." The boy looked up, calm and steady. "Thank you," he replied softly. "I just play." "You just play," the billionaire repeated, a smile touching his lips. "But it's more than just playing. You make people feel. You make me feel. I don't know if I've ever felt something like this before." The boy shrugged lightly as though it were nothing special. "I just try to tell a story," he said quietly. "Everyone has a story and I play mine." The billionaire's eyes softened. He realized that wealth and power could never create the honesty the boy had naturally. He had lived in a world where influence and money were the measures of success, but here, in front of a small child with a violin, he felt the limits of that thinking. Talent like this, heart like this, could not be bought. It had to be nurtured, respected, and given space to grow. The boy carefully packed his violin into its case, swinging it over his shoulder. He started to walk down the path toward the apartment buildings nearby. The billionaire followed quietly, not wanting to intrude, but unwilling to let the moment pass without some connection. People continued to linger, watching as the boy walked away. Some waved, some whispered, some simply smiled. The music had left an impression on everyone who had heard it. For a few minutes, the city felt lighter, kinder, more human. The boy's melodies had reminded everyone that beauty and emotion could exist anywhere, even in the most ordinary places. As the billionaire walked behind the boy, he found himself thinking about his own life in ways he hadn't allowed himself to think for years. The boy had no money, no influence, no fame, yet he commanded attention effortlessly, not through force but through truth. That realization stayed with him, echoing in his mind with each step. He wanted to do more than just admire. He wanted to understand, to help, to support in a way that would honor the boy's gift rather than control it. The boy paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. He looked around briefly, taking in the city, the buildings, the few people who were still around. The billionaire caught the glance and nodded gently, a silent acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight, respect, understanding, recognition that sometimes the quietest people leave the loudest impact. When the light changed, the boy continued on his way, violin case in hand, humming softly to himself. The billionaire stayed behind for a moment, watching him disappear into the distance, knowing that he had witnessed something extraordinary. It wasn't just the music. It was the courage, the honesty, and the resilience of the boy. That was what made him remarkable. By the time the boy reached the edge of the park, the billionaire had made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to support this child, not to take ownership of his talent, but to give it room to grow, to flourish, and to reach its full potential. There was something rare here, something precious, and he could not let it go unnoticed. The boy's footsteps faded into the city streets, the sounds of the park returning to normal. But the echoes of his music lingered, leaving a mark on everyone who had heard it, especially the billionaire. For the first time in a long time, he felt a stirring of something real, something human, that no amount of wealth or power could replace. And as the day went on, the memory of the boy's music stayed with him, growing louder, deeper, more insistent. It was a reminder that greatness could come in the smallest of packages, that true talent was measured not in riches or influence, but in heart and courage, and that sometimes a single person could change the way the world felt without ever intending to. The boy woke up early that morning, even before the city had fully stirred. The sun was just beginning to cast a soft orange glow over the rooftops, and the streets were quiet except for the distant hum of cars and the occasional bird. He stretched and yawned, still feeling the echoes of yesterday's music in his mind. It was strange, he thought, how music could linger not just in the air but inside a person. He could feel it in his chest, in his fingers, in the quiet space where he often wondered if anyone truly understood him. He grabbed his violin, tucked it carefully under his arm, and headed out. The park was only a few blocks away, and the morning air felt crisp against his skin. There were fewer people this early, but that was fine. He liked the quiet mornings. He liked playing when no one was watching, when it was just him and the music. It gave him a freedom that the afternoons never could. By the time he reached his usual bench under the oak tree, the first few joggers were passing by, nodding politely but mostly ignoring him. He set up his violin, and as soon as the bow touched the strings, the softest note floated into the morning air. It was gentle, almost shy, but it carried with it a kind of quiet strength. He closed his eyes and let the music flow, as if it had been waiting all night to be released. The billionaire had arrived even earlier this time. He had made sure to come alone, without assistance, without cameras, without anyone to make him look important. He walked slowly through the park, careful not to startle the boy, careful not to interrupt the flow of music. There was a new respect in his step, a humility he hadn't known in years. He realized that yesterday's experience had changed something inside him. The boy's music had touched him in ways he couldn't fully explain. As he approached the bench, he noticed how focused the boy was. Every movement, every gesture was deliberate yet effortless. The melody was simple but full of feeling, full of life. The billionaire felt a lump in his throat. He had spent a lifetime chasing wealth and influence, but in this moment, he understood that those things were meaningless compared to what this child could create with just a violin. He waited quietly, letting the music wash over him. He didn't want to speak yet. He didn't want to disturb the honesty of the moment. For a while, he simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, watching the boy's fingers dance across the strings. He realized that the boy's music was teaching him something he had long forgotten: the power of patience, the importance of attention, and the beauty of giving without expecting anything in return. The boy played for a long while, lost in the sound, lost in the story he was telling. The notes rose and fell like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, always full of emotion. The billionaire felt as though he could see pieces of the boy's life in the music, the struggles, the quiet victories, the small moments of happiness that made it all worthwhile. He had expected to feel impressed, perhaps entertained, but he hadn't expected to feel humbled, moved, and inspired all at once. When the boy finally lowered his violin, the billionaire stepped closer. He wasn't sure how to start, how to speak without sounding like he was intruding or patronizing. He took a deep breath and said softly, "Your music, it's incredible. I've never heard anything like it." The boy looked up at him, calm and steady, as if he had been expecting this. "Thank you," he said simply. There was no pride in his voice, no need for approval. Just honesty. The billionaire hesitated, then spoke again. "Yesterday, I shouldn't have mocked you. It was wrong. I didn't mean to, but I see now how thoughtless it was. You didn't deserve that, not from anyone." The boy's eyes softened slightly. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm used to people not understanding. I just keep playing." The billionaire felt a pang of regret. He had spent his life surrounded by people who admired him, flattered him, and sometimes feared him. Yet here was a child, so young, so honest, teaching him a lesson he could never have learned from a boardroom or a meeting. He realized that wealth and power could never replace the humility that comes from truly seeing someone, from appreciating talent and heart for what it was. "I want to help," the billionaire said after a pause. "Not to control, not to own your music, but to make sure it reaches the world it deserves to reach. You have something rare, and it should be nurtured, not wasted." The boy tilted his head slightly, thoughtful. "I don't need help to play," he said softly. "I just want to be able to play and keep learning." "I understand," the billionaire said. "I can do that. I can help you find teachers, instruments, opportunities, whatever you need. You don't have to accept it if you don't want to, but I want you to know it's there." The boy considered this, and then nodded slightly. "Okay," he said. "I'll think about it." The billionaire smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his face. "That's all I ask. Just think about it. And keep playing. Never stop, no matter what anyone says." For a long moment, they stood there in silence. The park was quiet again, the morning sun spilling golden light across the grass. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the distant hum of the city provided a gentle backdrop. It felt as if time had slowed, as if the world had paused to witness this rare connection between two very different lives. The boy picked up his violin again and played a short, gentle melody. It wasn't meant for an audience, but the billionaire listened, feeling every note, every emotion, every unspoken word. He realized that he didn't need to say anything more. The music itself said everything. It was trust, gratitude, and courage all wrapped into one. When the piece ended, the boy lowered his violin and looked at the billionaire. "Thank you for listening," he said. "You don't have to thank me," the billionaire replied. "I should be thanking you for reminding me what really matters." The boy smiled faintly and packed his violin carefully into its case. He slung it over his shoulder and started to walk away, but the billionaire followed him, matching his pace. He didn't want to crowd the boy, but he also didn't want to let him go without showing that he meant what he had said. As they walked through the park, the billionaire asked softly, "Do you want to perform somewhere for more people? I can arrange that if you want, just so the music can reach more hearts." The boy thought for a moment. "Maybe someday," he said. "But not yet. I want to keep learning first. I want to be ready." "That's wise," the billionaire said. "There's no rush. I'll be here whenever you're ready." They continued walking in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The boy thought about the offer, about what it could mean for his future, and about how rare it was for someone to truly see him without judgment. The billionaire thought about the boy's courage, his dedication, and the honesty that had touched him so deeply. Both understood, without needing to say it, that this was the beginning of something important, not just for the boy, but for both of them. As they reached the edge of the park, the boy paused and looked back briefly. "I'll see you tomorrow?" he asked. The billionaire nodded. "Absolutely. And I'll be listening." The boy smiled faintly, then continued on his way toward home. The billionaire stayed behind for a moment, watching him go, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He realized that meeting this child, listening to his music, and witnessing his dedication had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain. He had learned humility, patience, and the power of heart over wealth. By the time the boy disappeared from view, the billionaire had made a silent promise to himself. He would do everything he could to help this child's talent grow, not for fame, not for recognition, but because the world needed more of what this boy had to give, and perhaps in helping him, he would rediscover a part of himself that had long been forgotten. The city continued to wake around them, but for both the boy and the billionaire, the morning had shifted something fundamental. Music had bridged a gap between two lives that might otherwise have never crossed, and in that bridge, something rare and extraordinary had been born: trust, respect, and the possibility of a future where talent and heart were cherished above all else. And as the boy's footsteps faded into the streets, the billionaire felt a quiet, unshakable hope. He knew that the boy's journey was only beginning, and he would be there to support it in whatever way was needed. For now, that was enough. The music had spoken, and they had both listened. The morning air was cool and calm as the boy walked toward the park, violin case in hand. The streets were quieter than usual, and the city seemed to be waking slowly. He had spent the previous night practicing, his fingers stiff but eager, running through melodies that had been growing in his mind for weeks. Today felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet excitement that he couldn't explain. When he reached the park, he noticed that there were already a few people gathered near his usual bench. Word of his music had spread further than he realized, and some early visitors had come to listen. The boy smiled faintly to himself. He wasn't playing for the crowd, not really. He was playing because he had something to say, something inside him that demanded to be heard. He carefully set up his violin, testing the strings, feeling their familiar resistance beneath his fingers. He lifted the bow and drew the first note. It floated softly at first like a gentle invitation, and then grew, weaving through the air, catching the attention of everyone in the park. People stopped walking, their eyes fixed on the boy as if they had stumbled into a moment of magic. The billionaire arrived shortly after, walking quietly without attracting attention. He had promised himself he would not overstep, would not interfere. He simply wanted to watch, to listen, and to be present. Yesterday had been a revelation, and today he wanted to see how the boy expressed himself when he was free, without pressure or expectation. The boy's music flowed effortlessly. Each note carried emotion. Each melody seemed to tell a story. There was joy, there was sadness, and there was hope. An unspoken message that even in difficult times it was possible to create something beautiful. People gathered around, forming a circle at a respectful distance. Some were strangers, some recognized him from the video shared online, but all were united in the moment, captivated by the sound. The boy played a tune that was different from anything he had performed before. It was confident, bold, and filled with energy, as if he were telling the world, "I am here, and I will not be ignored." The crowd responded instinctively. Some clapped along, others swayed to the rhythm, and a few children danced quietly on the grass, their laughter blending with the music. The atmosphere felt alive, electric, as if the city itself had paused to listen. The billionaire watched in awe. He had been around talent his entire life, but this was different. There was no arrogance, no attempt to impress, only truth, only heart. He realized that true greatness was not measured by fame, wealth, or recognition. It was measured by the ability to touch others, to inspire, to convey emotion that could not be forced or manufactured. As the boy continued, a reporter who had heard about the park performance from social media quietly stepped forward. She didn't want to disturb the music, but she couldn't help capturing the moment. She held her camera at a distance, recording the performance while taking careful notes. This was no ordinary story. It was something rare, something human, something unforgettable. The boy shifted the melody, introducing a new rhythm that was playful and light, yet still carried depth. It was a tune that made people smile, that made them forget for a moment the troubles they carried with them. Even the billionaire, who had seen the world in a harsh and competitive light, felt lighter. He realized that he had been so focused on achievement and power that he had forgotten simple joy, simple wonder. The boy reminded him what it meant to feel alive, to be fully present in the moment. When the melody reached its climax, the boy played with a force and confidence that made the strings sing. The sound echoed through the park, drawing even more people in. Passers-by stopped mid-step, drawn by the music like moths to a flame. Some knelt, some stood, some clapped quietly in rhythm, all united by the power of the boy's violin. It was a moment of pure human connection, a reminder that music could bridge gaps, break barriers, and create community. The billionaire felt a surge of admiration and something else he hadn't expected. Pride. Not for himself, but for the boy. He had witnessed a young life dedicated to something meaningful, something honest. He had seen courage, talent, and heart combine in a way that could not be ignored. He knew that the boy's future was bright, and he wanted to support him without taking away the independence that made the music so authentic. As the final notes faded into the air, the park erupted in applause. People cheered, some whistled, some clapped with tears in their eyes. The boy lowered his violin, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He was tired, yes, but satisfied. He had shared a part of himself with the world, and it had been received not with judgment or mockery, but with understanding and appreciation. The billionaire stepped forward, his face calm but full of emotion. "You've done something incredible," he said softly. "I don't think anyone here has ever heard music like that before. You have a gift, something rare. You should never stop playing." The boy looked up at him, a faint smile on his face. "I won't," he said. "I'll keep playing as long as I can." "That's all I want." "You will," the billionaire replied, "and I want to help. Not to take over your music, not to make it mine, but to give you opportunities to learn, to grow, to share it with the world when you're ready." The boy considered this for a moment. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "But I want to keep learning first. I don't want to rush." "Of course," the billionaire said, nodding. "There's no rush. Take all the time you need. I'll be here to support you whenever you're ready." The crowd around them started to disperse slowly, some approaching the boy to offer words of encouragement. "You're amazing," one woman said. "Thank you for sharing your music." A man with a child in his arms smiled, saying, "He reminded me that beauty exists in the smallest places." Even the children who had danced earlier waved goodbye, their eyes wide with admiration. The boy packed up his violin, careful as always, and slung it over his shoulder. He started walking home, the billionaire following at a respectful distance. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a connection that went beyond words. The billionaire knew he had met someone extraordinary, someone who would not just play music, but who would inspire hearts and minds along the way. As they reached the edge of the park, the boy paused and looked back. "Will you come tomorrow?" he asked. The billionaire smiled warmly. "Yes, I'll be here listening." The boy nodded and continued on his path home. The billionaire stayed behind for a moment, watching him go, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that life had handed him a rare gift in the form of this child and his music. He had learned humility, patience, and the importance of heart over wealth. He had been reminded that the simplest things, honest effort, passion, and courage, could have the most profound impact. Over the next few weeks, the boy's music continued to draw attention. The billionaire kept his promise, quietly arranging opportunities for him to meet skilled teachers, providing resources for better instruments, and helping him connect with people who could nurture his talent without taking control. Each step was guided by the boy's comfort and wishes, ensuring that the music remained pure and true. The boy never let the attention change him. He continued to practice diligently, to play in the park, and to share his music with those who stopped to listen. The billionaire often watched from a distance, seeing how the boy inspired everyone around him, not just with notes but with dedication, courage, and the quiet confidence of someone who believed in the value of what he created. Months passed, and the boy began performing in small local events, gradually building a reputation for his extraordinary talent. People who had first seen him in the park continued to follow his journey, sharing stories of the child who had once played quietly for a few curious listeners and had transformed their understanding of beauty and persistence. The billionaire remained a steady presence, offering guidance and support without ever overshadowing the boy's independence. He had learned that true influence was not about control, but about fostering growth, encouraging potential, and celebrating achievements without claiming them. He found himself changed by the experience, more patient, more thoughtful, and more aware of the quiet human moments that truly mattered.